Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to. No, I'm only joking. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Economics Unrigked's first video on ending US government shutdowns forever. I'm Jamie Smith, and over the coming weeks, I'll be looking at how the economy gets tilted from tax loopholes to market power, and I'll be showing positive, evidence backed ways to unrig it. We're going to start with one thing that's really warping the US economy at the moment, the shutdown. So, without further ado, let's dive right in.
The fact is, we could end shutdowns forever starting tomorrow. What if the government default during US budgetary debates was to keep the lights on and the paychecks rolling out? What if shutdowns were impossible by design? Wouldn't that be something?
These are tempting questions to ponder as this shutdown rolls into its fourth week.
There are ways the US could do this, lots of them. Some are easy, some difficult, some democratic, some less so. Many are already in place in countries where shutdowns don't happen, such as the UK, where I'm from. So, what are they, and how could they end US government shutdowns that are so painful? Firstly, let's briefly look at the background behind this shutdown and the cash killing concept in general.
So, why did the government shutdown happen? To put it simply, you need 60 out of 100 seats in the Senate to vote in favour of a budget to pass it. This is called a supermajority because it's more than half of the seats in the House.
Although Republicans control both houses of Congress, at 53 seats they're still seats short of the supermajority required to pass the current budget. In fact, few of the recent governments have controlled enough of the seats to pass budgets without opposition assistance. While budgets of some kind or other are often passed by negotiation, they sometimes fail because the two sides can't agree. Often there's a particular stumbling block. In this case, the Democrats wanted to continue providing health funding through the Affordable Care Act, which the Republicans proposed to shut down, and they didn't want to fund it. This meant that the Democrats refused to provide the 7 votes needed to pass the budget unless the act continued to be funded. The Republicans refused, and no budget was put in place by the end of the appropriate deliberation time. Because of the Treasury Protective Constitution, they require many activities to stop when there is no Congress-approved budget in place. The Constitution states that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. So while the executive branch, the President and his party, put forward the budget, the Congress has the power of the purse because it passes laws. But this doesn't have to be the case. Shutdowns are a US-specific policy choice, not a necessity. Other democracies avoid them with automatic funding and confidence-linked budgets and many other policies. And these are all things that could be these are all things to a greater or lesser degree that could be put in place in the US. In a lot of democracies, the legal default is to keep spending, keep people in their employment, keep the economy chugging along as usual, because the alternative is dangerous. To summarise before we go into it in detail, the UK and many parliamentary systems in these budgets are seen as confidence votes, confidence in the government votes. If no budget can be agreed, the government is seen to not have the confidence of all of its members. So it collapses and there's a need for a new vote. A lot of non-US presidential systems often let the executive sort of minimally maintain the baseline operations during impasses like this one. the core idea is that a default continuity, almost a sort of machine to keep the budget going, de-weaponizes these funding gaps. Many democracies require only simple majorities to pass budgets as well. So, is reduction to a simple democracy really that simple? Remember, I said that in the Senate, a 60 vote supermajority, more than half of the seats in the Senate had to vote in favour of a budget to pass it. One simple way, or one way that seems simple to reduce the chance of a shutdown might be to reduce the requirement down to just a simple majority. 51 votes out of 100 could pass your budget. Some argue that this is not only more functional in ending these damaging shutdowns, but it is more democratic too. After all, in a representative democracy, if you have more votes than the other party, you should be able to pass your policies into law, even if you only win by one vote. Of course, questions over representation, winning votes and losing elections remain. Al Gore. So there are counter-arguments and controversies here. The idea of just having a simple majority increases highly partisan budgeting. You don't have to negotiate with the other side, which means the budget can swing from left to right after each change of power, and there can be no continuity, which is obviously not a good thing for an economy that wants to stick to some kind of security. It also undermines long-term budgeting plans and requirements where having a secure future is important, such as defence, infrastructure, Medicaid. Of course, a good sort of counter argument to this could ask how secure all of these things are when shutdowns can just end the funding in the first place and send everybody home. Or at least, most non-essential people home. Thirdly, of the counter-arguments, it reduces the Senate's deliberative role and increases brinksmanship. After all, the Senate is there to review these laws. So having a steady sort of ability to consider what's in these policies and having some kind of needing a negotiation to get a supermajority sort of increases that deliberation. Although you might say there's not a lot of deliberation and there is a lot of brinksmanship, slow brinksmanship, if that's possible, happening at the moment, and there was a lot just before the shutdown. So perhaps it's best to stay away from the simple idea, and we can look towards the ideas of other countries that are already in place. We'll start with parliamentary democracies because they're the most different from the US presidential democracy. And we're going to look into a thing called budget and confidence. And this means that if the House can't pass a budget, it's presumed to be unable to govern, and the government can often collapse. So failure triggers government change and an election, not an administrative shutdown. If all negotiations fail, you really can't pass a budget in the time. You may lose the vote, lose the backing of your party, and lose your job. So that really puts the onus on you to get down to business and pass that budget. At the end of the day, where a lot of us are self-interested people. Some people might say politicians are especially self-interested. I don't know. I'm not going to get into that. So if your job's on the line, you're going to put an extra oomph into passing that budget. Okay, so one other option is to limit budgeting authority to the executive branch or the party in power and their leader. This is functional and arguably democratic, but it's definitely not constitutional. The Constitution says the power of the purse lies with Congress. Also, it could add more power concentration to what is seen already arguably an overpowered executive branch of government, Trump. Another idea, which is a simple one, which could be enacted and could help in situations like this, is automatic continuing appropriations. So the prior year levels roll over by default until a new budget passes. At least the basic levels required to keep, governments running and paychecks going out. This has happened in the US in the past, pre-1980. The problem is it could incentivize the party responsible for the previous budget to continue the deadlock because they like the levels that they've put in place. Because the solution to that is to put caps and limits in place. Another somewhat simple thing to put in place when a party votes in a budget, or when the government votes in a budget, they put a sort of overlap into the next budget. So for, let's say, for 1 year, they will vote through 15 months of budgetary continuity, and these are called votes on accounts. So the government can draw advance funds to cover the early months of the next financial year, even if it doesn't have a budget in place. This has still got full democratic backing because it was voted into place. I think this could be one of the really good things to put into place in the US, simply because it's very democratic and it's very functional. You can still, the money still comes out, the payrolls are still paid. They allow interim spending without service disruption. There are few problems with democracy and the constitution as the spending has been voted through, and they can be, and the actual votes on account, the money that's drawn through can be minimal and capped to prevent upsets. Now, some presidential systems give executive budget maintenance authority, or at least minimal maintenance authority, in cases like this, in cases where the budget hasn't been voted through. So that means there's stronger executive carryover in some systems. Outside the US, even non-parliamentary systems allow the executive to maintain baseline operations during an impasse, and this avoids furloughs and service stoppage and layoffs, as we've seen in the US recently. Yeah, presidents are basically given authority to provide the money to sustain the essential operations during gaps in these presidential systems. This happens in both Brazil and Argentina. Argentina did it in 2024 to avoid a shutdown. And the BBC has pointed out in the recent past that it's a big reason why no shutdowns seem to happen in Brazil. The executive can just keep the money rolling. There is that constitutional thing of placing the power of the purse with Congress. having the president spend by himself could again be a problem. And also, it wouldn't work fully in the current shutdown as Trump is pro cuts. He's not pro spending. So the Trump cuts might be deeper than the shutdowns. Now, this is another idea from us across in the UK. And it's expert peer nominations to the upper chamber. Obviously, in the US, both chambers of Congress, lower and upper, are elected. So both have democratic power, both have interests in their voters and their parties. While this is the most democratic method, arguably it's not the most functional, especially where budgets are concerned. Some governments, such as, like I said, the UK, have an upper house composed fully or partially of legal and economic experts and political representatives who are there for life, who are chosen by the various governments, and in the case of some of the experts, by their peers, such as the legal experts, the judges. These experts, they reduce the chance of a shutdown by focusing on function, on keeping the economy functioning, with no party loyalty or democratic responsibility. So the budget's voted through by the lower house democratically, and then the upper house can review it purely by economic function. Budgets rarely remain unpassed by the upper house in the UK until the time of execution, simply because there are a lot of the economic and legal experts whose duty is to maintain government function. They don't get voted in or out, so there's no duty to voters or party. There's none of this sort of back and forth argument between one party and the other, because there is no party to them. So there are some fairly major problems with doing this in the US that you've probably already guessed. The US government has always been founded and focused on complete elective democracy of both the upper and lower houses above all, and it's unlikely to allow unelected representatives to replace the elected ones in the House. I would recommend a solution where you could include 10 or 20 economic specialists with a limited remit to just review and approve and vote on budgets and financial matters and nothing else. And their votes only count if an impasse is reached. So they're kind of a secondary function system behind the actual the elected sitting senators. These could be people who are put in place for a long term by the governments, but who don't serve the governments, so they don't have to get elected and have to get the governments re-elected. Similar to the Supreme Court. So just to bring it all together and in a way that could benefit the US, the US could adopt automatic continuing resolutions policies to continue prior year levels until a new budget's passed, to keep, or at least at a minimal level, to keep things going, to keep paychecks going out and to keep places open. As it's a bit of a more extreme measure, could be to treat failure to pass essential supply bills as government failure events requiring a new vote. as opposed to service stoppage. This would probably only happen if the if the majority of the electorate thought that it should happen. This isn't a democracy after all. So I guess it depends how bad the US thinks these shutdowns are. Are they so bad that we should pass that you should pass a long-term bill to say, look, if you guys don't pass a budget, we don't have faith in you. We're going to have to vote in a new government. You could add economic experts with a limited remit to the Senate, as I just mentioned. And these could be, for example, be employees put in place by the governments, and when the others retired, like the Supreme Court. A less extreme measure is to broaden the definition of essential services coverages to protect more workers in critical programs during disputes. So to boil all this down to what the US could adopt and what could benefit the US, we can have automatic continuing resolutions at the prior year's levels until the new budget passes to keep things going. We could give the president and the ruling party the ability to pass necessary supply bills to keep things working, although this might not work with Trump, knowing him. You can treat failure to pass supply bills as government failure events requiring a new vote rather than service stoppages. This kind of depends on how much the electorate, like I say. Do you guys think that not passing the budgeting bills is how bad is it? I know there's a lot of pain in America at the moment, and I know there's a lot of anger. If that anger builds up enough, maybe there's a situation where you could vote this through and say, in future, if you can't pass a budget, you can't be the government. Something that I did say was extreme, that after that it didn't seem so extreme. Add economic experts with a limited remit to the Senate, such as, for example, senior government employees who are put in place by governments, then retire or pass, like the Supreme Court, and they can vote through the budget to mitigate the extra votes that are required, but only after the democratically elected senators, but votes have failed. Like I said, that's an extreme option. Of course, there's a few counter arguments and controversies where this is. Things like automatic funding. It removes the sort of leverage for fiscal constraints. But then the response to that would be that defaults can include modest caps, time limits, temporary adjustments, and still avoid, the harm to services. Like the UK, you can just draw through the amount that is needed to keep things running, and you can vote that through on the previous budget. So say, like I said, vote 15 months of budget through for a 12-month period to give you 3 months of overlap. And that should give plenty of time for the government to get the next budget through. Of course, another counter argument undermines checks and balances. But then the oversight would remain via regular appropriations, hearings, and elections. The idea of government failure events actually kind of increases checks and balances in some ways. Basically, the situation is that shutdowns are a choice baked into the government's fiscal process. They were a choice taken a long time ago. They don't have to happen. We could flip the default to continuity tomorrow. You could flip the default to continuity tomorrow. and I think that would be a great thing to do. So, which of these shutdown shuttering ideas do you think should be put through, if any? Tell me below. Share this with something who thinks that shutdowns do save money and see what they think. And subscribe to get more bright ideas to improve our economic futures in future. Thank you for watching.